Beneath those rugged elms, that yew tree's shade where heaves the turf in many a mouldering heap, each in his narrow cell forever laid, the rude forefathers of the hamlet sleep.
Nestled in the heart of Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island, is a beautiful, serene, and sacred 4 acres of land known as the historical Old Protestant Burial Ground, 1784 to 1873. In approximately 1784, on the instruction of the Governor Walter Patterson, the first British governor of Prince Edward Island, surveyor Thomas Wright reserved a 4-acre lot for a burying ground on the east side of the Princetown Road, now called University Avenue. The earliest formal record is the grant of land to the parish of Charlottetown, now St. Paul's Anglican Church, made in 1826 by the acting administrator of the colony, the Honorable George Wright.
Well, my name is George Wright, and since I was a young child, I have been had an interest in the cemetery back when I was a young child. When my uncle was home from Calgary, who was interested in genealogy, we went looking for my great-great-grandfather's grave in the cemetery, which would be back in the 40s or 50s. And since then, any time there was a effort to do something with the graveyard, I was always involved, but until the restoration that we did beginning in 1998-99, there was never funds to do anything. With the restoration of 1999, we had a major fundraising and raised a large amount of funds, and were able to do the restoration that you see today. It's the burying ground that was used during the entire colonial period of Prince Edward Island. The burying ground was closed in 1873, the year that Prince Edward Island joined Canada. So we do cover the colonial period of Prince Edward Island. And the people that were involved with establishing Prince Edward Island are mostly buried in this graveyard. My great-great-grandfather, Honorable George Wright, is buried there with his family, and I can identify 7 or 8 other grandparents that were buried there. And there were no good records kept. We researched a lot of different areas, from the gravediggers' records and newspaper records, and just wherever we could find names. And in the book, there's a CD-ROM included with the book that lists all the burials that we have been able to research.
Right now we're looking at the grave of Andrew Whale Pemberton, who was a captain in the British Army in His Majesty's Rifle Brigade. And he was part of the British Army detachments that were stationed here for more than 100 years. He died in March of 1828, and the tombstone itself was erected at a later time by his fellow officers. Here we have the grave of 3 British Army soldiers from the 7th Fusiliers who died in the mid-1800s. R. Trophon, J. Massey, and G. Wiltshire. They were all relatively young men, and they were part of the British Army detachments that stayed on the island. These 3 men would have had their tombstone erected at a later date by their fellow soldiers who remained behind. I find this a very interesting marker for Ensign Peter Smith from the New Brunswick Fencibles. Peter Smith was raised in Charlottetown, and as a young boy in the late 1700s was what was known as a boy soldier. He joined the army when he was only 10 years old, and later on in the War of 1812 he had a distinguished record in the Niagara Peninsula, and as a reward he received his commission. Now, at that time, to be an officer in the army, you were supposed to be a gentleman as well. And the local governor was quite upset when he received his commission because he claimed he was too soon raised to the rank of a gentleman. But this marker was placed here by his sons, and Peter Smith had a distinguished commercial record in Charlottetown in the late 1800s. This marker here I find very thoughtful. It's in memory of two little girls, Jessie, aged 5 years, and Lila, 2 years. They were part of a military family in Charlottetown, and they both died in December of 1855. No doubt some influenza or some illness spread through the barracks, and these two little children of Colour Sergeant Coughlin of the 76th Regiment both died in December, and the youngest one died on Christmas Day.
If there is a spot in the city we have a right to respect and preserve sacredly, it is the spot where the city's fathers and mothers lie buried, bearing the names of men and women to whom the city owes very much. Names associated with the foundation of the city's institutions, government, churches, and schools. The city's founders and makers of Prince Edward Island. There is history in this old graveyard. Here may be found reminders of those whom we have read about in history books, people who were closely associated with the welfare of the town as well with government in its early days. Several of the monuments and headstones bear the names of prominent individuals. Many of the memorials show beautiful carvings and ornamentations. Some are still standing, some are lying flat on stone or iron supports. Here are auctioneers, wheelwrights, soldiers, and blacksmiths. Theophilus de Berzay, the first Anglican rector who served for 47 years, is here with his wife, children, and grandchildren. Here are joiners, carriage builders, tinsmiths, teachers, and poets. John LePage's wife and children are here. Printers and tax collectors, tavern keepers, turners, doctors and architects, butchers, bakers, stationers, millers, masons, saddlers, and harness makers are here. You might think work would go ahead as usual in the city under the ground. Life and death. Here's Dr. Henry Johnson. The young preacher just came over from England, but died within a few weeks of his arrival. Frederick Goodman and the Honorable George Wright's son drowned with Anne Maloney when their skiff was hit by a sudden squall on their way back from an outing to St. Peter's Island. John Ross, the publisher, lost his son the same year the Charlottetown fire destroyed his business. Arthur Agassiz, a young gentleman, had a seizure at the bottom of a well where he went to retrieve a bucket and drowned despite all that the servants could do. Eliza Taylor, wife of Neil Graham, the ship's carpenter, died in childbirth. His second wife suffered the same fate. Many women and children died, but we all have our time, and it may be they are not in this city under the ground at all, but amidst the stars and near the throne. Should we not, however, pay honor to the place where they were last seen? Surely, if we forget them, their lives, their deaths, their contributions, and humanity, the city above the ground will be the poorer.
I'm just thrilled to see you. I had it in my mind for a long time that I wanted to see Sam come in the entrance to experience this beautiful spot that's very close to his home, and we really want children and people to come in and use this area. St. Paul's Church is such an important part of that history, and the people that began our church, many of them are here, and the history is amazing. The very first rector, Reverend Theophilus de Berzay, is at the very rear of the cemetery in the south, and he's up here. So In a few minutes, I'd like to walk up and start with the Debrecen slab. The board of the Old Protestant Burying Ground has worked on having proper education in terms of the restoration of the cemetery. A lot of people that were acting up sometimes here, Sam, because it was fairly rough in the beginning.
Yeah.
You know how when you get sick and you have to take medicine?
Yeah.
But they didn't have medicine then. Look at this one. I was wishing this would be the Rankin one so that...
Kind of interesting how it says like died on it.
Yeah, it's true.
Person we were looking for earlier named Colbeck.
Yes, we're looking for
Because
Kalbeck.
I saw him over there.
You found the Kalbeck stone.
Somebody actually showed me, and I thought, and he mentioned that it was captured by pirateers, and I thought that might be the person we were looking for.
That's him. You got it, Sam. And there's people here that would love to see it if you want to take them up. Good job, Sam. This is a city under the ground. It's the Charlottetown that used to be. Here are many prominent people. Ambrose Lane, twice administrator of the early colony. George Wright, Surveyor General and 5 times administrator of the colony. Condolee Rankin was the High Sheriff, Sam, and I sort of thought that you and I might go and look for the High Sheriff. That was appealing to me. Peter McGowan, the Attorney General. There are so many people of note. It just brings us into the sense of what these people contributed, and we can just enjoy this space together.